Sprezzatura. Sprezzatura was a word that
The mic is working.
that described the ideal state of the Renaissance man. The Renaissance man not only had to be very good at fencing, dancing, painting, philosophy, art, politics, he had to make it look easy. Making it look easy was sprezzatura. Now, Lucchese, the people to the north in the city-state of Lucca, think sprezzatura is a bad word. They don't like that word because they think that the Florentines were very, very full of themselves, and they were. But I just wanted to say, Ian's not full of himself by any means, but he has that certain sprezzatura of making the connections between the natural and spiritual world look easy, and it is a very difficult topic. And I want to tell you something about Ian. He got his BS degree in Auckland, New Zealand, in physics and math in 1972. That's already up there. Master's at Massey University, New Zealand, computer science in 74. How is this so difficult? You have your master's in computer science here. And really, and Ph.D. in theoretical nuclear physics. I was informed that it's not atomic physics, like something else Ian tells me. It's nuclear physics, 1979. He's a fellow of the Institute of Physics in London, fellow of the American Physical Society, professor of physics at the University of Surrey in the UK up till 2006. And since that time, he's been a nuclear theorist at Lawrence Livermore National Atomic Labs. And what he does there is that he does the math for the bench guys. So the fellows that smash the atoms and do the basic experiments, they come to Ian and say, now you do the math and you do the hard part. We did the easy part, you do the hard part, and make sure that we're on the right track here. Ian has written a remarkable book called Starting Science from God, which I've now read about 5 times. And once again, I'm beginning to understand it. The first part is pretty dense in terms of its attention to quantum physics. But after all, that's what Ian is. He's a quantum physicist. So naturally he's there. But I'm delighted to be able to present to you after a number of years. I believe Ian was here about 12 years ago and spoke to the Swedenborg Scientific Association. But he's back, and I'm sure this will be a wonderful talk. So thank you, Ian.
Try the loud voice method. Okay, so this is a summary of my academic position, but parallel to that career, that's my academic career, I have been interested in Swedenborg from almost the same period as you saw. When I was doing a master's, that middle degree in Massey University in Auckland, I discovered that the library had New Philosophy as a journal, and I was interested in minds because lots of computer people are interested in how thinking occurs and so on. And in this New Philosophy journal, I discovered an article by Wilson van Dusen called The Presence of Spirits and Madness, and he talks, and in this article, which is addressed to, it was made subsequently made into a little booklet, he addresses how the relation is between spirits and the natural world, and that seemed to me then to be an important topic, a similar topic to what I was trying to solve in terms of trying to understand how minds and body act together. And so, as I say, in 1974, I read this article in New Zealand, and in it he references Swedenborg. And he gave an address of the Swedenborg Foundation in New York or something. I can't remember where it was. So I went to the post office and wrote off and got a book catalogue. And then they said you can buy Divine Love and Wisdom for a certain price. So I got an international book token and sent it off, and I got mailed back this book, and I started reading Swedenborg. And it was clear that Swedenborg had answers. Swedenborg claimed to have answers to many of the questions that I had, but when I kept digging through, I couldn't quite understand the answers. I kept looking for the mechanism, the secret clockwork, so to speak, behind the universe. The Swedenborg claims that, you know, there are correspondences. I have already worked out that there ought to be something like correspondences, something that connects content in the mental or spiritual realm with forms and structures in the physical realm. I mean, that's the problem of consciousness, the problem of qualia, as we say these days. So I was interested in that, and I saw Swedenborg had an answer, and I tried to understand Swedenborg's answer. And as you can see at the bottom here, I realized that Swedenborg's description of discrete degrees was clearly part of an answer to my problem, and I could see Swedenborg used love as a substance, and so I could see that a simple form of love in the physical wouldn't be a conscious love, it would be an unconscious urge or a propensity, I say here. And so I saw that the idea of propensity as a substance could be used to understand quantum theory. So at the same time as I was trying to understand Swedenborg, I was also doing this nuclear physics, quantum theory, and I was trying to understand. So I wrote a book, some article of trying to understand quantum physics and understand Swedenborg at the same time. And then I decided that I still couldn't understand the mechanism that Swedenborg seemed to be indicating. So in 1979, I made, in retrospect, was a rather important decision. I decided to go back and read Swedenborg, so to speak, from his own point of view, rather than just read Swedenborg and cherry pick the little bits that I needed to fill in the gaps of my own theory. I decided to go back to the beginning of Swedenborg and read all of Swedenborg and see, you know, start from the assumption, make the assumptions that Swedenborg says to make, which obviously begins that there is a God, and he is the source of life, and he produces results by influx, and so, and it produces results by discrete degrees. So I spent the next 20 years trying to understand what discrete degrees were. And this is the book that you see, this blue covered book, is something that I started writing in 2008, which I decided, by then I'd sort of worked out what Swedenborg's overall picture was, but because I grew up in connection with physics, I could make the connection back from the theology of Swedenborg back down to physics. And so my sort of claim, my unique selling proposition, so to speak, is that I can see the steps from Swedenborg's theology, which describes God through a spiritual world, through a mental world, into the physical world. So what I tried to do with this book is, when I started to write it, I didn't know whether I could see all of these steps, but I thought I should begin at the beginning. So it's called Starting Science from God. I begin with God. I take the basic principles of theology, which we'll talk about in a minute, and make some deductions to produce what the world should look like. And so if this is my normal talk, and I have a little disclaimer. This material is not supported by my institutions. I have dual lives, so to speak. I have a secret life as a Swedenborgian enthusiast. That's why I'm here. But I don't tell people at work about this. So if they ask questions, I can discuss things. But I haven't had any. No one's complained about me at work. I have a reputation for doing things properly. And so, that's what we showed. And so, about the year 2000, I sort of came to the conclusion that I did have an overall picture. And so, at the Swedenborg Society in 1999, I sort of tried to take an overall, give a talk, a top-down presentation. In other words, start from God and make some presentation of what discrete degrees and come down to understand quantum physics. So that was my first presentation of the big picture, so to speak. And this book is really that big picture written out in all its glorious details as a book rather than just a talk. And so in 2002 I gave a talk here, quantum physics and spirituality related, and then I gave some other talks about duality and non-duality, because discrete degrees means is at least two things. If there's at least one discrete degree, you've got two different things which are connected, but they're different substances. And so many people in the consciousness and in religion think non-duality is the way to go. That everything is, we're all really God, and Atman equals Brahman, this is the phrase. And so I was sort of pushing back against, this was a meeting of people who tended to have that idea, so I took an opportunity to speak about Swedenborg's view of discrete degrees and to emphasize in particular that if love is unselfish, then it has to love people who are different from itself. And in non-duality, you don't have any love that's distinct from yourself. So within non-duality, all love is essentially selfish, it was an argument that carried some weight at the time, and I thought it's still one of the important arguments in my book. And at the bottom here, you can see theisticscience.org is a website that I made, and I actually have quite a few websites, which some of you might know. Okay, my most popular one is BibleMeanings.info. Okay, this is a collection of the Bible that links to what various people have written as the spiritual sense. So it starts off with Swedenborg on Genesis and Exodus and Revelation, but lots of other people have written about other books, and so I've tried to collect all this collateral literature and link it together. And so this mentions Swedenborg as the author, but it's a way of introducing people to Swedenborg. And so at the top I have my own web page, and then I have some physics, understanding physics, and then I discuss mind and body, and then there's the Theistic Science one, a website related to this particular book, and then there's some other general ones, and then there's some Swedenborg writings from the old New Search site when for a while it was down, so I managed to get the text from that, so I made my own version of that website. And then there's another website here, Swedenborg Study, which I've collected collateral literature and sermons and other information books. Okay, so because I've been by myself, my main route of publicity was not to give lectures like this, but to make websites in which people can read whatever they want to read. So I try to connect science and theism, and if you're interested in, I'm going to give a brief summary, but this point is in this little white booklet in more detail. So those of you who are interested in, because some religious people are nervous about connecting science and religion because they feel rightly that if we connect religion too strongly with science and the science is disproved, then it reflects badly on the science, and also reflects badly on the religion. But there's two ways of doing it. I say we can do this connection as long as we're careful. The traditional way is to look through the evidence of the world and say this must have been made by a God. That's the traditional way, sort of the argument from design of it. But these are inductive generalizations, and the logicians and mathematicians will know that deductive arguments are much stronger than induction. So in this book, I've tried to follow a deductive way of starting from God, understanding the basic principles of theism in a Swedenborgian way, and then come to predictions which can be verified by evidence. And as I say, the logic is stronger with induction. We still allow some contingencies, some loose joints, to allow some wriggle room in case, if I make a mistake, then at these points of where the connections, because from God I derive this general structure, and then I identify it in terms of what we know already. And that identification of what we know already is something where different people will do it in a different way. And so that's a little challenge there. But the point is that I'm trying to do what's called, it's called the hypothetico-deductive method. In other words, I make a hypothesis. I'm using theism, as understood by Swedenborg, to make a detailed prediction or hypothesis of a theory, a general framework, and then we want to see whether that's verified or confirmed by experiment. So this is the general way I'm doing it. This is the structure of this book. I'm trying to establish some general principles starting from Swedenborg, and so this is why I call the book Starting Science from God. And so I think it is supported, but if you read it and you discover something wrong, then you better tell me because I need to know whether I made a mistake. Because even now I read Swedenborg and I make sure I understand, because if I discover something when I read Swedenborg that couldn't be explained by this, then that's a very serious question, and so I need to make sure that I'm doing it properly. But I think I'm okay so far. Probably I would say that, wouldn't I? But what I want to focus on here is, I'm going to talk about the book itself soon, but I want to outline some general questions about why I think Swedenborg's contributions are important. And this is related to the fact that I'm beginning another book after that one, in which I try and make Swedenborg's contributions address the questions that philosophers and scientists have today. So I'm discussing with the Swedenborg Foundation about the new book, and they can have a meeting next week, and this book may come up on a discussion. And I claim that many of the ideas of Swedenborg are very relevant to these debates, and we try and make a case for this. And so I'm going to go through, I don't want to talk for too long, but I want to go through some of the examples of what these contributions are, and I want to see whether you recognize what Swedenborg's contribution is to solve these questions. Some of you ought to recognize, see, some people say that God created the nature by, first of all, created the natural laws, and then the world follows natural laws. Do we believe that? Does Swedenborg believe that? No. I see some head shaking. But many people interested in science and religion think that this is an appropriate way for God to have created the world. But Swedenborg, we know not. So we know that Swedenborg creates objects by powers in influx and out of high degrees. And so the actions are not uniformly mathematical, because minds are not governed by principles of mathematics. They're given by principles of logic and reason and love, which are not themselves mathematical. We can describe some general features of that. So the bottom line is that God does not manage the world by mathematical laws. So therefore, natural laws, as people think sometimes God creates the world, are not really the way we should see it. We should see it in terms of objects with certain powers acting from influx and so on. So this is part of this Swedenborgian ideas can enter into the debate about natural laws and so on. Another question people have is, scientists describe forms and events, but they don't know what the stuff of things is. They don't know what the substance of the physical world is. They might make a guess in terms of electrons and so on, but they certainly don't know what the substance, what mental substance is. And in fact, quite a few psychologists, you might, those of you who study psychology will know Patricia Churchland, or her husband, they ask rhetorical questions. What is mental stuff? We don't have any idea about mental stuff, therefore dualism is nonsense. Minds are not separate from matter. But then, Swedenborg, can we answer what the question of mental stuff is? What is the stuff of, what's the substance that the mind is made out of? Any suggestions? Love. Yes. So, love is the being of man. This is the way divine love and wisdom works. And so we generalize it. I generalize it to something like love, which I call propensities, which is a very general word which could be used to describe love at any one range of this degree. This is the being, the substance of everything. So you get an idea which can be used in quantum mechanics. The wave function is a form of this propensity. And you can use it in psychology, you can use it in spiritual life, you can even apply it to God. The substance of God is love. God is love, and form, wisdom is form. And so in other words, the substance of things is not matter, it's not information, it's not consciousness, it's not form, but there are many distinguished philosophers actually have said that consciousness, I mean, if you ask people these days what minds are made out of, if not matter, they say mind is made out of consciousness. But we know that consciousness is something that you get when loves act. It's the manner of operation of consciousness. And so, but love itself is what minds are made of. And these, as I said here, these propensities can be natural. There's propensity mental like desire, spiritual like love, or divine like love. So, in other words, from Swedenborg, this is what I realized when I started reading Swedenborg. He begins to answer some questions that people have had for a very long time. I mean, Descartes tried to have an idea of minds being separate from bodies, but he didn't know about love. In fact, he thought minds were essentially thinking and not loving. So there's a difference there. So this is a kind of idea of mind which is not Cartesian idea. Now, scientists like theories of everything. You may have heard this. They like a universal theory which applies. In other words, a theory which applies to when only one kind of thing exists. And then if you suggest to them that more than one kind of thing exists, then they say, well, how are they connected? What rules? You know, how does it make sense to have more than one kind? Makes sense. But in quantum physics, people sense that there are some hidden secrets in quantum mechanics. There's the measurements, and then there's the wave function, and there's the energies, and then there's the virtual processes, and then the quantum vacuum. These are all like little discrete degrees in physics. So because I was interested in physics, I could see that all of these things were examples of discrete degrees in physics which behave together just like Swedenborg's discrete degrees. So in other words, I used Swedenborg to understand what physics was about. So I saw Swedenborg says that discrete degrees are the universal pattern, and they operate by generating substances from lower substances, so to speak, from higher ones. The lower substances are not, we are not made out of pieces of God, but God has generated or created the things from which we're made. And then God enlivens us by giving us more influx, by generating the life in us. So as I said, discrete degrees are not aggregation, they're not just an appearance, they're not just a projection, not just an illusion, and they're not continuous emanation, as Plotinus may have thought. So Swedenborg provides a unique set of ideas here of discrete degrees. And this book is taking discrete degrees seriously. As a physicist, I took discrete degrees seriously, and this book is making a new understanding of what discrete degrees are, and trying to answer lots of questions within the mind. Discrete degrees in heavens. Swedenborg talks a lot about celestial, spiritual, and natural heavens, but there are discrete degrees in the mind. It turns out psychologists have discovered, and as I said here, there are discrete degrees in physics. So by taking a global view, you can learn a lot from Swedenborg in many applications. So what I'm saying is that we ought to be using Swedenborg's ideas in the popular, professional, philosophical, even any public discussion of these issues. Swedenborg has a lot to contribute, and I don't know, many of you will know a lot about Swedenborg, but how many of you are contributing to the debates that are happening, in which Swedenborg's ideas provide an important contribution. So I wish to encourage the academics and the writers among us, actually, even to write fiction books or movie scripts in which Swedenborgian ideas is a very important function of people like yourselves. So, if you ask philosophers whether minds are simple or composite, a simple mind can't be divided, and a composite mind can be divided. Aquinas and Plato and Descartes and modern philosophers who don't want to be materialists say that minds are simple and therefore they don't follow the normal rules. But in other words, they don't have parts, and consequently we have immediate knowledge of all of the parts of us. But Swedenborg actually denies both of these. Swedenborg says that minds are composite, and in fact he says our mind is composite just like our body is composite. In fact, if you look at a mind, it looks like a body. So that's a rather remarkable claim. But the more to the point is, from the general philosophical view, minds are not simple or indivisible. And furthermore, we might be mistaken about our thoughts. Okay, so, and in fact, that might sound a negative thing, but in fact, in everyday life, we continually have ideas occurring to us that we don't know where they came from. You should all read, not just dreams, but even what to say next. Or, an idea suddenly occurred to me, this is a good way of doing that, or in everyday life, every day, every second of our lives, the ideas occurring to us, that we select the ones that seem good and we try to think about them and decide we learn. So what this means is that indivisibility is not a mark of the mental. So in other words, see, Descartes saw that extension to be spread out in space was the mark of physical, but now we're saying that minds are also spread out in some sense. So you have to go and have an idea of minds that has nothing to do with Descartes. I know Swedenborg appeared in one of his books to appear to be endorsing Descartes' view about minds, but I think once you compare the details, you see there's lots of differences, at least in the way Descartes is normally understood. Related to this is minds are not in space. Most philosophers of mind think that minds are not in space because we never point to our thoughts. You can't put love under the microscope, they say rhetorically, and we can never point to images, but Swedenborg says that minds are in space. And in fact, even it appears to be three-dimensional space. Not some strange 11-dimensional or 28-dimensional space like some physicists speculate. But the point is that this space is not the fourth dimension, or the fifth dimension, or the sixth dimension of ordinary space, because in that case you could rotate, and you would see your mind appearing in ordinary space. But rather, the mental space is not continuous with physical space. That's the important thing that Swedenborg says. There's a mental space which is along, I'm using a spatial metaphor, I can say alongside physical space, but that's a mental space. Or parallel to physical space, that's also a spatial metaphor. But it exists at the same time as physical space, and there are causal connections between them. So that's why we can't physically point to thoughts. Not because, but those of you that have read the story of Swedenborg know that you can point to minds in the spiritual world. Swedenborg does meet people who are minds living in the spiritual world. You can point to them. There's someone. So you can, once you're in that space, you can point to thought. Another thing is time. There's one reading that even Swedenborgians have, that minds are not in time. I've even seen some esteemed by one of my colleagues, who I won't name, who thinks himself as a Swedenborgian. His argument was that the spiritual world is outside time, and therefore spiritual life, we live immortally in the spiritual world. But that doesn't, do you agree? Is that, are we frozen statically in the spiritual world? No. In fact, the spiritual world is full of, it's very flexible. It's got lots of changes. In fact, there's wonderful things happening all the time in the spiritual world. Lots of things are happening in the spiritual world. So I think most of you will realise that because spirits and minds are alive, there's still a succession of states, that there is a time, there are successions. There's a simple model that physicists use called causal nets, which actually is quite useful for describing network of causes in the spiritual world. And immortality, that we know, we're told, occurs for people. Whether people are in heaven or hell, they still remain immortal. Who knows what's the basis for that? Is it because they're spiritual, or is it some other? Why does Swedenborg say we have immortal life?
Is it due to our immortal soul? Our soul is a different substance.
Yeah, our soul is a different substance. But what does when Swedenborg talks about soul, is he referring to what you see in the spiritual world? If you meet someone, you meet your relatives when you die, are you seeing their soul? Or
no.
What does Swedenborg mean by the soul?
We have we're created in the image of God.
Yes.
We're capable of the marriage of God and wisdom.
Yes. So
in conjunction with God.
Yes. So where's yes.
Which implies eternal life.
Yes, indeed. So what did you say? And there is influx from this. But the question is, why do people in the spiritual world, whether they're in heaven or hell, still continue to exist as an identifiable person? What is it? What's the marker, or why do they remain constant?
Soul.
It's to do with the soul, but Swedenborg,
Well, it's because
if you think about it, means something very specific when you say the soul that's responsible for the identity. He talks about something special that God looks after about us, and God protects about us. Do you remember?
Freedom.
Yeah, well, there's freedom, yes, but
Or use.
yes. But what's the highest thing that's closest to God of us? Does anyone remember?
Human internal?
The internal.
Human internal?
It's the human. What do you mean by the human
I
internal?
don't know, it just comes to mind.
That's what I would call part of the answer. But do you remember which internal Swedenborg is talking about? We need to. Okay, there isn't a human internal which is constant. But the point is, does anyone remember what Swedenborg was referring to when he refers to human internal?
I think it's the soul, isn't it?
It is the soul, yes, but
The marriage of love and wisdom from the Lord?
it is. Well, that's what's there. But there's some special part of us.
I love the way you're stumping us.
It's not life.
I had fun stumping a few people yesterday. Sorry?
The Olympus?
The limbus is the physical world, that part of the physical world which gives us permanent memories and enables us to go to either heaven or hell. But I'm saying this, whether we go to heaven or hell, there's still something about us which is constant.
It's the radiant belts, the first two radiant belts around the cranium.
Okay,
the human internal.
that's very close to the answer. Yeah, but the radiant belts we think of as the radiant belts of God, or the sun, the spiritual sun. So what is it about us which is connected to these radial belts? Doug?
As of so.
Yeah,
Well, the soul is the recipient of life.
yeah, the soul. Okay,
Right.
but which soul? My question is, which soul is that which is closest to God, and which soul is that which is constant, whether we go to heaven or to hell? That's what I'm really asking. Does anyone remember?
Our loves?
Our loves, yes, the soul. Does anyone remember Swedenborg's description? He said there are 2 discrete degrees above even the celestial heaven. Does anyone remember that frame, that description? What are these discrete degrees above the celestial heaven?
Well, in translation I've read, they're called the radiant belts.
They're called the radiant belts. But are they us or are they God?
They're not God.
They're not God. But are they identified with particular people?
Yes, that I believe
Okay.
that is the identity.
Okay, so I'm going to say, I think Swedenborg calls these the inmost. Does anyone remember that phrase, the inmost?
All over the place.
Sorry?
I remember the phrase. but not-
You remember the phrase? Okay. I think Swedenborg's inmost is our unique love which identifies us as a particular person, which stays this constant. God preserves this to be constant no matter what we do, whether we go to heaven or hell. So it's not our principal love which can change between heaven and hell, but it's something above our normal visibility, even when we're in heaven, which uniquely identifies us. It's still love, because each of us has a particular function in the world. And so this is above heaven and it's a constant, okay? It doesn't change. This inmost is protected by God from change. Okay? So, and that's constant. That's almost outside time.
So this is Swedenborg's explanation for the difference between the divine itself and
Yes.
individuality.
Yes.
So individuality was constant.
Yes, this inmost, do you remember what Swedenborg says when he starts to form a new church? After a last judgment, he takes the inmosts from babies that were born, died as fetuses, because so they haven't been contaminated by it. And he makes a new heaven by taking his inmosts and assembling them together, because then they're amenable to leading and he can reform them, and then he keeps them constant. Okay, so what I'm saying is that these seemingly obscure parts of New Church doctrine actually have a very important psychological, they have important consequences for the identity of people. Because we say that our identity is built on our love, but if we go to heaven or earth, does that mean we become a different person we don't not recognize at all? Or is there something which is constant even if we swap between heaven and earth? Or choose to go to one or the other? So I'm saying there is an inmost, which is a constant love. Okay. Anyway, I'm saying that the point is there's a lot of debate in the philosophical literature about what it is, what is the basis of personal identity. And they say either it's memories or it's continuous bodily form. From Swedenborg, we know it's actually these things, these inmosts hidden away that we hardly know. And even those of us that read Swedenborg are not quite sure exactly what they mean. They might be in the radiant bells, but they are individual people. There's one for each person. And so, okay. How are we going? Good night, no, too high. I'm going to go a little faster now. Okay. When I give a talk about desires and thoughts, many cognitives, many psychologists are what are called cognitive psychologists that thinks of thoughts as basic, like cognitive processing, and will is a description of that. But from Swedenborg we know that the love is the form, is the basis, and that wisdom is something like the taking form of that love. And so if we think of love as the stuff from which we make things in spiritual space, then the shape that these things take is like what that love is thinking. And that way, it's a way of seeing. Swedenborg doesn't exactly say explicitly that love is the substance and wisdom is the form, but if you read Divine Love and Wisdom, there are many places where he hints at that. And what I've done is I've taken that understanding, thoughts of the form of the stuff which is love. Now I've tried to make sure I understand what Swedenborg is saying, and it seems to work. Okay, there's a few other things. Instantaneous adults. Yeah. Why can't God create us as adults immediately? Why can't you create a biological species? Why did he have to go through all this evolution over millions and billions of years? Why does it take us 50 years to get an ounce of sense into our heads? Why does it take so long?
You have to grow.
You have to grow. What is it that you get when you grow? Why couldn't he just give us knowledge to start with? Why mess
Freedom
around?
is something. We need freedom.
We need freedom. Why do we need freedom?
We need the freedom to choose whether we're going to be good or bad.
Yes. So, in other words, we need choices to have been made by us. And I think this is important. The permanent life of a person depends on their past actions. This is something which I read from Swedenborg. And if you disagree with me, please say so. But I think this is what I read in Swedenborg. And if you make an adult immediately, like Adam, as in the traditional story of Genesis 1, then that adult wouldn't have a past. So they wouldn't have a robust life. They could easily be misled. And lo and behold, Adam was misled. So there's a lesson there. We have to live.
But with that, under Swedenborg, that first item,
Yes.
they say the permanent life, it's not necessarily that we get locked in. We can alter that in our lifetime. Right?
We can't alter it,
That's
but
what,
we can
Well,
ask
when
God to
the
alter
Lord's
for us
when
in
the Lord-
prayer and
if we
regeneration.
are open to and cooperating.
Yes.
We can ask for forgiveness, mend our ways.
Yes.
Lord will
And then
forgive us.
what God does is rearrange these past actions in our ambit. Okay, He puts some bad habits to the side and says, if you promise to not pay attention to them, then I will stop them influencing you. They're still there. So the past actions don't go away, but their significance has changed.
Well, I heard a non-theist who no one knows about Swedenborg.
Yes.
Remark about negativity closet.
Yeah. So there's lots. Those of you that there's lots. Counselling is all about this. Psychological counselling is very important. It's a big business. And many of us are bothered by things like that. Okay. And so there's some general consequences that persons are grown in stages, churches are grown in stages, species are grown in stages. There's lots of things that we can learn on these basic principles. Doug?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that something I found about Swedenborg is that our eternal life is our intention of our actions.
Yeah.
So it's like our innermost thoughts.
Yeah.
So we try, sometimes we judge people from our outward actions.
Yes.
Depends on
Yeah, so the important thing about the past action is what the love and wisdom was that was in us that produced that action. So I think we're saying the same thing. Yes?
I was just going to say that remains that you get as
Yeah.
a small child is what gives you the ability to
Yeah, indeed.
become
So
a useful adult.
these are past actions that have come to us for free, in a sense. And without them, if we just relied on our own past actions, we would be rather poor. I mean, imagine starting off life as an adult based entirely and only on the decisions you made as a teenager. But fortunately, when you're an adult, you remember things, especially when you have a young baby, you discover all sorts of desires and affections in yourself you never knew existed. I didn't know that I had it in me, but maybe
Isn't the endeavors up from love almost as important as the actions itself. That's, you know, tied into the
Okay.
choice.
You're going to start the debate between love and action. No,
No.
I think Swedenborg says you have to have love and wisdom and action. And if you miss any one of those three, it's insufficient. You have to have all three. Okay. And another thing about discrete degrees. This is a little challenge for you folks. How are we going for time? How many discrete degrees are there? Okay. How many discrete degrees are there? I'm going to ask you.
At least three.
You have three?
At least.
3 is a good number, at least 3. How many? Any advance on 3?
Each of those have their own number.
Oh, really? So how many does that make?
9.
9. And do each of those?
I forgot.
Do we have it?
There are an infinite number of discrete
Oh.
ways that come together in pairs and triplets of three,
Exactly.
reflecting the Trinity
Okay.
of God.
Okay. You folks are pretty good at answering this. It took me a long time to realise that. I do say God in the three creation. And in fact, this book, I have fun making, well, actually George knows about this because I've talked to him about it in the past. That you can have a discrete degree of heavens, and we know about 3 degrees there, and then discrete degrees of the mind, there's lots of sub-degrees of the mind. So this book has fun trying to work out what psychologists may have discovered in the past about discrete degrees in the mind and also discrete degrees. So it's a treasure trove. Mathematicians ought to have fun there. Okay, I think I'm going to, there's lots of time that I could talk, but the purpose of this day is a book expo, and that requires people looking at books as well as me listening to this talk. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go, I was going to talk about my book, but I'm decided to go to an interesting section I had at the end about what to do, okay? I assume I'm going to now take it as read, my book. I could talk a lot about my book, but because I did it 5 years ago, I'm now thinking about another book. And I'm thinking about how to help the ideas of Swedenborg in today's world. And so, this is a question. This page is addressed to the academics at an institution like this. Did I invent? Okay, theistic science is a phrase I use to describe my enterprise. It's trying to use science theory, make theories in science based on theism as a starting point. And the question of how do you publish ideas of theistic science? What's the position of the journals that we have? The Swedenborg Scientific Association, its primary aim is to publish books on the scientific works of Swedenborg. Is this correct?
Yeah.
But it's taken a more general ambit now, hasn't it? See, the Swedenborg Society in London, its remit is to publish books on Swedenborg. That's just fair enough. But it's allowed to publish a journal as well as publishing books about Swedenborg. So that's why you see recent journals from the Swedenborg Society in London, which cover a whole range of topics that are not just Swedenborg. The articles of the Society allow it to publish a journal. So that would mean that I had difficulty publishing on theistic science with them. So these are things that we ought to build up. I feel a little bit alone, as you might imagine. I'd like to build up a network of advisors. And quite often I've been a referee for articles in New Philosophy. I've been a referee for some of my colleagues who are interested in Swedenborg, and I've read what they've written, and just to be a pre-referee to make comments so that they'll later life will be easy. I volunteer to do that. And then there's questions of getting science meetings together. So this is sort of from the academic point of view. I'm trying to imagine a field like theistic science or physics or biology or psychology, and what it might look like. And I look at various things that I could do in physics, and I'll probably continue to do that. This limbus is something which is obviously very important. And in biology, I see many questions. I think Swedenborgians who are interested in biology have an enormous world in front of them, trying to understand the correspondences of biological structure, biological functions, neurology, what is the exact correspondences in the brain, and so on. And evolution. I mean, there's enormous public debate, especially in the United States, about what's happening in evolution. Do we have unguided or guided? How, from Swedenborg's point of view, how would creatures be created progressively? How does he do it? There's lots of questions there, and I encourage people to think about these. Theology. Now, the first book, this first topic is what's the new church view on the second coming? Because if you look on various popular theologies, there's all sorts of phrases and terminology with different views of dispensationalism and premillennium and everything, all sorts of things. But what's the new church view? How does it fit into that? And then it turns out that there's a lot of bad theology being propagated by the atheists, like Theodore Dobzhansky, I think I pronounced his name correctly, wrote an article called "Nothing in Biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." But if you read this article, it's astonishing. He uses a whole lot of terrible theological arguments that are not even consistent with each other within the same article. And Darwin uses a lot of theological arguments. He says, I see this thing in this animal. No God would produce something like this. Therefore, we have unguided evolution. So there needs to be some pushback against these bad theologies. It's starting in some places. Another thing is that I think new church people should talk about Paul. Something we need to understand what Paul is saying that's true and what's not true, and trying to write down. I haven't seen yet a proper book by new church people on Paul, and especially seeing if you consult with modern Bible scholars, they're all very skeptical about Acts. They're very suspicious that Acts is written with an ulterior motive as a sort of political statement, because there are accounts of Paul's conversion, 4 different accounts which all contradict each other to start with, and things that are said to happen to Paul which you never see in Paul's own writings. And so there's always contradiction. But this new church scholarship itself makes a terrible amount of naturalistic assumptions. Jesus, what's it called? Jesus group? What's it called?
Can't hear you.
Sorry?
Can't hear
Oh
you.
no, that's because I was uncertain. There's a group of new church scholars, a group of New Testament scholars who may try to understand about Jesus and try to work out what the thing of Jesus is. But then we have our own view about Jesus. And Jeffrey Child and N.C. Burnham, I'm not sure N.C. Burnham's first name, so I'm going to find out soon, have written books about the regeneration of Jesus, but I think that's a topic which ought to be continued to be investigated. Okay, coming to the end. And then there's questions of, shall we say, marketing, to put a blunt term to it. I've been talking to my colleagues for a while of trying to imagine a TV program like you see about popular science, but talks about Swedenborgian science. A simple TV presentation to talk about discrete degrees. Now, Curtis is trying to talk about discrete degrees, but he has trouble. But someone like me ought to participate in a group which is producing some presentation about discrete degrees, even just for yourselves, because as we see in this talk, everyone has different ideas about discrete degrees. That we ought to at least be singing from the same sheet about what discrete degrees are. So I want to, and then blogging is to blog about Swedenborg's ideas, and furthermore, not just be speaking of the voice in the wilderness, but to discuss with other bloggers. And I have a range of websites. You saw my list. I've otherwise published a book. Some of us have ideas we should publish. It's actually quite easy to publish a book these days. It's published online, it's very easy. So if you have some ideas you want to present, it's quite easy. And fiction, I say, is even more important, because people remember fictional stories. There are some old ones, there are some new ones, but there are not actually many Swedenborg fictional stories. Maybe movies, or at least you can write a screenplay. And then Steve David has this Swedenborg project has changed hands recently, and so this is available for use for some projects, so to speak. So we have some discussion about that. I think that's coming to the end. Yes, and lastly, I'm writing another book. I mentioned this at the beginning. My working title is Swedenborgian Art Strategies, but it might change. The point is to use these ideas, as I said earlier, about Swedenborg, and try and address concerns, the problems that other people have, and make arguments. And I say, just as a reminder, as you probably would remind me, that arguments are necessary but not sufficient. So you can't just convince people with arguments, but at some point people benefit from having things spelled out in an easy to understand terms.
Yeah, I wonder if you could comment on the reception that your ideas have gotten in general in the two different communities of the scientific physics community and then in the theological
I still don't have very much perception in science. I agree, when I talk about just substances and form, there's still resistance. I'm just beginning.
and in the theological
Well,
realm?
I wrote a paper about 15 years ago, which is physical law and divine immanence, discussing this question about laws and influx. And I got it published in a Science and Christian Belief, in a regular journal, and that was quite useful. It's probably the first time Swedenborg's ideas that appeared in that journal. But my mention of Swedenborg was confined to footnotes. So I'm a little bit secretive. Hello, yes.
You mentioned Theodosius Lubchansky.
Yes.
And he's a man who I think very highly of as one of my heroes. I've read his book.
Yes. Have you read
The
his
Biology of Ultimate Concern.
Yes.
And I've read an article that he wrote online about
Yes.
theism. And I just wondered, what are these arguments that you are find so objectionable?
Okay, so I think I've got his paper online, so I can actually point you to the article. And if you give me your email, I'll send you a link to point to this actual article. And then you can assess it for yourself, and along with another philosopher's commentary on these arguments. So I think it will be useful. If you haven't seen that discussion, I think it will be useful discussion for you to see. And then we can continue to bring up.
Thank you for your talk. It was very, very interesting and enlightening. And can you imagine, if this is the sort of talk he gives, can you imagine what his tests must be like? If you were a student in his class, you'd be killer, right? So I had a proof copy of your book.
Yes.
And there's a section in the back where it's basically a list of possible objections
Yes.
to your viewpoint from science, from theology,
Yes.
from so on.
I try to encourage the debate, yes.
Yes, that's great. And so I want to take, at one point you raised the question, well, is this science?
Yes.
Is it falsified, for
Yes.
example? And I'll really try and juice it up here and say, well, really you're a creationist. That's what you are. You're a creationist. And I mean, you're trying to inject purpose, teleology, goals, ends, intentionality into it. And that has nothing to do with science. Science follows a certain method, and that method only countenances natural causes. And you are just going right against the scientific method. And so, how dare you call this theistic science? This is at best theistic philosophy. How's that for a challenge?
Yeah, guilty as charged. But it's a chance of becoming a science. Because psychologists, do they know how minds think, how minds feel, what the relation is, about stages of growth? There's lots of questions. And there are questions in physics about quantum physics and gravity and so on, which are not answered. There's lots of questions in which Swedenborg's discrete degrees ought to show some light. But I agree that it will be unacceptable to many people. So that's why I'm happy to talk to you here. I hope you don't do as much as those people.
There are social scientists
Yes.
who use the deductive method.
Yes.
And the way of falsifying that is a different method of falsification than this assumption or perhaps the logic that was used.
Yes.
But that's a method that's tried and true. And
Well,
well-established.
yeah, so my book is framed like that. And so that if you see a hole in it, you better tell me. Sorry, yeah.
I think we may be at a cusp, and I think all the effort that has been accelerated in the Swedenborg circles and churches, whatever, organizations, the big pushes, new translations, scientific conventions, whatever, papers, since 1990 onward, have been poised because the scientific community, academia, apparently had this project in the 60s or 70s for brain research, cognitive science, developed and come to some degree of fruition in the late 90s, early 2000s. Also, it's drawn in, of course, people may know about Buddhists and MRI. There's a fellow who Penn may know of, a published book called Principles of Neurotheology. Okay. So, I think that some of these people realize that you may disagree, which but I think that there are a number of, my sense is cognitive sciences in California, East Coast, England, realize that naturalism's come to a wall and we can't sit that way. I think we have a grand opportunity out there. And I think your ideas you propose, and implicitly Dr. Reuben Bell, Dr. David Fuller, and others, presented probably. I think we're at a place where we've done a lot of groundwork, even more given, and I think there could be good fruits in the future.
Yeah, so the trouble is these people realize that materialism isn't enough, but then they don't have a positive idea what to replace it with.
We're not behind.
We're ahead, we're leading. So they just say, there must be something immaterial about the mind. There must be something not in physical space. There must be something not this, not that, non-physical. But these are all negative. But from Swedenborg, we have a positive conception of mind. So we're way ahead of the game at this point.
Right. Prominent philosophers like Cyril at Berkeley have reintroduced very strong arguments. Some people disagree with the Chinese room argument, whatever.
But that's still
intentionality. And have a confluence of mind, language, but the theoretical aspects are touched right on the Swedenborg and now the emotional aspects are coming in as well.
It's all there, but we have to introduce God to explain it. So that'll probably make them even more upset. It's really good.
But I think there are ways to do it.
Yeah, well, so what I'm doing is I'm building up an alternative to, as best I can in a slightly insulated environment, and then I'm trying to.
But aren't you asking for a multidisciplinary, somewhat?
Well, that's what I want to aim for.
From various fields.
So here, at least, we should be able to discuss these things. Okay. Well, it's now 2:00, and I don't want to infringe on the time of whoever's coming after me. So, thank you very much.